Then they sawed through the joists and retreated into the hall, as what was left of the floor heeled and sank. They had leant with practice, and the second floor collapsed more easily. By the evening an odd exhilaration seized them as they looked down the great hollow of the house. They ran risks and made mistakes. When they thought of the windows, it was too late to reach them. "Core," Joe said, and dropped a penny down into the dry rubble-filled well. It cracked and span amongst the broken glass. "Why did we start this?" Summers asked with astonishment. T was already on the ground, digging at the rubble, clearing a space along the outer wall. "Turn on the taps," he said. "It's too dark for anyone to see now, and in the morning it won't matter." The water overtook them on the stairs and fell through the floorless rooms. It was then they heard Mike's whistle at the back. "Something's wrong," Blackie said. They could hear his urgent breathing as they unlocked the door. "The bogies?" Summers asked. "Old Misery," Mike said. "He's on his way," he said with pride. "But why?" T said. "He told me," he protested with the fury of the child he had never been. "It isn't fair." "He was down at South End," Mike said, "and he was on the train coming back, said it was too cold and wet." He paused and gazed at the water. "My, you've had a storm here. Is the roof leaking? How long will he be?" 5 minutes. I gave Ma the slip and ran. "We better clear," Summers said. "We've done enough anyway." "Oh, no, we haven't. Anybody could do this." This was the shattered, hollowed house with nothing left but the walls, yet walls could be preserved. Facades were valuable. They could build inside again more beautifully than before. This could again be a home. He said angrily, "We've got to finish. Don't move. Let me think." "There's no time," a boy said. "There's got to be a way," T said. "We couldn't have got this far." "We've done a lot," Blackie said. No, we haven't." "Somebody watch the front. We can't do any more." "He may come in at the back. Watch the back, too." T began to plead. "Just give me a minute and I'll fix it. I swear I'll fix it." But his authority had gone with his ambiguity. He was only one of the gang. "Please," he said. "Please," Summers mimicked him, and then suddenly struck home with the fatal name. "Run along home, Trevor." T stood with his back to the rubble, like a boxer knocked groggy against the ropes. He had no words as his dreams shook and slid. Then Blackie acted before the gang had time to laugh, pushing Summers backward. "I'll watch the front, T," he said, and cautiously he opened the shutters of the hall. The great wet common stretched ahead, and the lamps gleamed in the puddles. "Someone's coming, T." "No, it's not him. What's your plan, T?" "Tell Mike to go out to the lav and hide close beside it. When he hears me whistle, he's got to count 10 and start to shout." "Shout what?" "Oh, help, anything." "You hear, Mike," Blackie said. He was the leader again. He took a quick look between the shutters. "He's coming, T. Quick, Mike, the lav. Stay here, Blackie, all of you, till I yell." "Where are you going, T?" "Don't worry, I'll see to this. I said I would, didn't I?" Old Misery came limping off the common. He had mud on his shoes, and he stopped to scrape them on the pavement's edge. He didn't want to soil his house, which stood jagged and dark between the bomb sites, saved so narrowly, as he believed, from destruction. Even the fanlight had been left unbroken by the bomb's blast. Somewhere somebody whistled. Old Misery looked sharply round. He didn't trust whistles. A child was shouting. It seemed to come from his own garden. Then a boy ran into the road from the car park. "Mr. Thomas," he called. "Mr. Thomas, what is it?" "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Thomas. One of us got taken short, and we thought you wouldn't mind, and now he can't get out." "What do you mean, boy?" "He's got stuck in your lav." "He'd no business. Haven't I seen you before? You showed me your house." So I did. That doesn't give you the right to—" "Do hurry, Mr. Thomas. He'll suffocate." "Nonsense. He can't suffocate. Wait till I put my bag in. I'll carry your bag." "Oh, no, you don't. I carry my own. This way, Mr. Thomas." "I can't get in the garden that way. I've got to go through the house." "But you can get in the garden this way, Mr. Thomas. We often do." "You often do?" He followed the boy with a scandalized fascination. "When? What right do you see? The wall's low." "I'm not going to climb walls into my own garden. It's absurd." "This is how we do it. 1 foot here, 1 foot there, and over." The boy's face peered down, an arm shot out, and Mr. Thomas found his bag taken and deposited on the other side of the wall. "Give me back my bag," Mr. Thomas said. From the loo a boy yelled and yelled. "I'll call the police. Your bag's all right, Mr. Thomas. Look, 1 foot there on your right, now just above." To your left, Mr. Thomas climbed over his own garden wall. "Here's your bag, Mr. Thomas." "I'll have the wall built up," Mr. Thomas said. "I'll not have you boys coming over here using my loo." He stumbled on the path, but the boy caught his elbow and supported him. Thank you, my boy," he murmured automatically. Somebody shouted again through the dark. I'm coming, Mr. Thomas called. He said to the boy beside him, "I'm not unreasonable. Been a boy myself. As long as things are done regular, I don't mind you playing around the place Saturday mornings. Sometimes I like company. Only it's got to be regular. One of you asks leave and I say yes. Sometimes I'll say no, won't feel like it. And you come in at the front door and out the back. No garden walls. Do get him out, Mr. Thomas." "He won't come to any harm in my loo," Mr. Thomas said, stumbling slowly down the garden. "Oh, my rheumatics," H said. "Always get 'em on bank holiday. I've got to be careful. There's loose stones here. Give me your hand." "Do you know what my horoscope said yesterday? Abstain from dealings in first half of week, danger of serious crash." "That might be on this path," Mr. Thomas said. "They speak in parables and double meanings." He paused at the door of the loo. "What's the matter in there?" he called. There was no reply. "Perhaps he's fainted," the boy said. "Not in my loo. Here, you, come out," Mr. Thomas said, and giving a great jerk at the door, he nearly fell on his back when it swung easily open. A hand first supported him and then pushed him hard. His head hit the opposite wall and he sat heavily down. His bag hit his feet. A hand whipped the key out of the lock and the door slammed. "Let me out," he called, and heard the key turn in the lock. A serious crash, he thought, and felt ditherly and confused and old. A voice spoke to him softly through the star-shaped hole in the door. "Don't worry, Mr. Thomas," it said. "We won't hurt you, not if you stay quiet." Mr. Thomas put his head between his hands and pondered. He had noticed that there was only one lorry in the car park, and he felt certain that the driver would not come for it before the morning. Nobody could hear him from the road in front, and the lane at the back was seldom used. Anyone who passed there would be hurrying home and would not pause for what they would certainly take to be drunken cries. And if he did call help, who on a lonely bank holiday evening would have the courage to investigate? Mr. Thomas sat on the loo and pondered with the wisdom of age. After a while it seemed to him that there were sounds in the silence. They were faint and came from the direction of his house. He stood up and peered through the ventilation hole. Between the cracks in one of the shutters he saw a light, not the light of a lamp, but the wavering light that a candle might give. Then he thought he heard the sound of hammering and scraping and chipping. He thought of burglars. Perhaps they had employed the boy as a scout. But why should burglars engage in what sounded more and more like a stealthy form of carpentry? Mr. Thomas let out an experimental yell, but nobody answered. The noise could not even have reached his enemies. Mike had gone home to bed, but the rest stayed. The question of leadership no longer concerned the gang. With nails, chisels, screwdrivers, anything that was sharp and penetrating, they moved around the inner walls, worrying at the mortar between the bricks. They started too high, and it was Blackie who hit on the damp course and realized the work could be halved if they weakened the joints immediately above. It was a long, tiring, unamusing job, but at last it was finished. The gutted house stood there, balanced only a few inches of mortar between the clamp course and the bricks. There remained the most dangerous task of all. Out in the open at the edge of the bomb site, Summers was sent to watch the road for passers-by, and Mr. Thomas, sitting on the loo, heard clearly now the sound of sawing. It no longer came from the house, and that a little reassured him. He felt less concerned. Perhaps the other noises, too, had no significance. A voice spoke to him through the hole. "Mr. Thomas, let me out," Mr. Thomas said sternly. "Here's a blanket," the voice said, and a long gray sausage was worked through the hole and fell in swaths over Mr. Thomas's head. "There's nothing personal," the voice said. "We want you to be comfortable tonight." "Tonight?" Mr. Thomas repeated incredulously. "Catch," the voice said. "Penny buns. We've buttered them in sausage rolls. We don't want you to starve, Mr. Thomas." Mr. Thomas pleaded desperately. "A joke's a joke, boy. Let me out and I won't say a thing. I've got rheumatics. I've got to sleep comfortably." "You wouldn't be comfortable. Not in your house, you wouldn't. Not now." "What do you mean, boy?" But the footsteps receded. There was only the silence of night. No sound of sawing. Mr. Thomas tried one more yell, but he was daunted and rebuked by the silence. A long way off, an owl hooted and made away again on its muffled flight through the soundless world. At 7 next morning, the driver came to fetch his lorry. He climbed into the seat and tried to start the engine. He was vaguely aware of a voice shouting, but it didn't concern him. At last the engine responded, and he backed the lorry until it touched the gray wooden shore that supported Mr. Thomas's house. That way he could drive right out and down the street without reversing. The lorry moved forward, was momentarily checked, as though something were pulling it from behind, and then went on to the sound of a loud, rumbling crash. The driver was astonished to see bricks bouncing ahead of him, while stones hit the roof of his cab. He put on his brakes. When he climbed out, the whole landscape had suddenly altered. There was no house beside the car park, only a hill of rubble. He went round and examined the back of his lorry for damage and found a rope tied there that was still twisted at the other end round part of a wooden strut. The driver again became aware of somebody shouting. It came from the wooden erection, which was the nearest thing to a house in that desolation of broken brick. The driver climbed the smash wall and unlocked the door. Mr. Thomas came out of the loo. He was wearing a gray blanket to which flakes of pastry adhered. He gave a sobbing cry. "My house," he said. "Where's my house?" "Search me," the driver said. His eye lit on the remains of a bath and what had once been a dresser. He began to laugh. There wasn't anything left anywhere. "How dare you laugh?" Mr. Thomas said. "It was my house, my house." "I'm sorry," the driver said, making heroic efforts, but when he remembered the sudden check of his lorry, the crash of bricks falling, he became convulsed again. One moment the house had stood there with such dignity between the bomb sites like a man in a top hat, and then bang, crash, there wasn't anything left, not anything. He said, "I'm sorry. I can't help it, Mr. Thomas. There's nothing personal, but you got to admit it's funny." Written 1954.